How reckless was Russia's breach of Polish airspace? It's prompted tough responses and warnings from Warsaw and NATO. But was that the point of sending multiple drones over Poland? And does Moscow care? As the war in neighboring Ukraine escalates, is Russia deliberately testing NATO's limits? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, Poland's president says 19 breaches of sovereign airspace cannot be an accident. The Polish Air Force scrambled on Wednesday, shooting down 4 Russian drones that violated NATO-protected airspace. Though no one was hurt, Warsaw says it is the closest the country has come to open conflict since World War II. And for NATO allies, it's prompted a reassessment of how to respond to aggression. Here's a look.
Drones falling from the sky into NATO country territory is sparking strong statements in European halls of power. And Poland is closer to war than at any time since the Second World War, so says Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, after Poland recorded 19 incursions into its airspace by Russian drones, which flew in via the Belarus and Ukraine borders in the early hours of Wednesday morning.
The fact that these drones, which posed a security threat, were shot down is ours and NATO forces' success. But it changed the political situation. Therefore, Allied consultations took the form of a formal request to activate Article 4 of the NATO treaty.
Polish fighter jets and air defences scrambled, shooting down several drones. This man in eastern Poland was watching television. Ironically, a news report about drones, when drone debris crashed into and destroyed part of his house.
I turned on the TV and all the news was about this massive drone flight, and after a while I heard a plane flying over, and suddenly it seemed to descend more rapidly and the roar grew louder, and suddenly something boomed. The light fell from the ceiling in the downstairs living room. I looked out the window and there were sheets of metal flying from the roof.
As cleanups continue, wreckage across the countryside reveals several lightweight drones downed or crashed over Poland. They are low-tech and low-budget, often sent in groups to act as decoys to heavier, more powerful drones. European nations across the board offering their swift condemnation, but Ukraine's president urging more than words, imploring action.
This Russian activity was calculated, and we see what the situation was in the end, how difficult it was to deal with this. Ukraine has offered Poland the necessary assistance with countermeasures. No one can guarantee that there will not be hundreds if there are already dozens of drones. Only joint European forces can provide protection.
Meanwhile, Russian news reports scrambled to broadcast messages that Poland was not a target, and the Kremlin would be ready to discuss the issue with the Polish Ministry of Defense.
The strike targets in Ukraine territory have been achieved. All the designated objects have been hit. There were no targets planned for destruction on Polish territory. The maximum flight range of the Russian drones used in the strike, which allegedly crossed the border with Poland, does not exceed 700 kilometers. Nevertheless, we are ready to hold consultations with the Polish Ministry of Defense on this issue.
NATO Secretary Mark Rutte took a swipe at Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying it made no difference if the incursions into Polish airspace were deliberate or unintentional.
To Putin, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine. Stop the escalating war, which he is now basically mounting on innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure. Stop violating Allied airspace and know that we stand ready, that we are vigilant and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
While nobody died and the drones were downed, a Europe on even higher alert than before stands poised, its gaze firmly planted on Russia.
So was there a motive behind breaching Polish airspace? And is NATO responding appropriately? Well, joining me now to debate that and much more are from Strasbourg, member of European Parliament with Poland's Law and Justice Party, Dominik Tarczyński.
Thank you for having me.
Vienna, very welcome, former Russian diplomat and senior fellow at Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, Nikolai Sokov. And from Delaware, retired U.S. Army Colonel and president of the Delphi Global Research Center, Robert E. Hamilton. Thanks all so much for being with me. Dominic, no one was hurt, no severe damage done, but you think this really is serious because it's symbolic of something even bigger in the making. How so?
It is serious. It is serious because first time since the World War II, we had this kind of attack. We have to call it an attack because even, well, we have to discuss the intentions, but to me, it's very, very clear that the Russia is testing. They are testing our reactions. They observe the way NATO reacted, and I think NATO reacted properly accordingly to the situation. But again, it never happened since World War II. Even during the communism, we never had this kind of experiences. So it is serious, especially that it wasn't just a one drone mistake or this and that. We had probably over 20 flying objects, and some of them destroyed civil houses. So it is serious. You cannot say that was a mistake. And the most important is how NATO will react in the future of this kind of attacks again, because it's not the first one, because we knew about the cases in the neighboring countries, Ukraine neighboring countries. It's not the first time, and it's not the last time. As I said, it's the way to tasting NATO. They are observing the reactions, and they are getting greedy. They are getting more aggressive. We know Russia. You see, our position, Polish experience is completely different than the West, most of the West, because we went through the communism. So we know Russia. We know that they will not stop.
Quickly, though, Dominic, if major damage, had not been prevented, if these drones had not been shot down, what would have happened?
Most of them were shut down. Most of them were shut down.
So what would have happened if they hadn't been?
That would be a disaster. That's why I said that NATO reacted as it should, but still our equipment is not enough. That's why I'm not happy about most of the leftist governments in Europe. They are deciding to spend money on their ideology rather than on army. And there is so many examples that decision made by Germany, not spending 2% on NATO, but spending money on illegal migrants was wrong. Poland is paying nearly 5% for NATO. We are aware of the threat. So that is the difference between conservatives and the leftists.
We can talk further about, defense spending across Europe. But first, let me get to Nikolai, because if this wasn't an accident, what was Russia's intention, and did it serve Russian interest? Because it was a gamble. Major damage could have been done.
Well, I would not actually be surprised about Russian escalation. Certainly not. Actually, as I warned about the possibility of escalation vis-a-vis Europe for last 3 years since the war began in earnest in 22. But in this particular case, I still am more inclined to think, it was an accident. And the reason is really very simple. At this particular moment of time, I do not see a rational reason for Russia to escalate vis-a-vis NATO. Basically, a lot now hinges on the decisions that will be made by President Trump. And simply Russia cannot afford right now to antagonize him. So suppose things go kind of bad with the United States, using new sanctions, new pressure, stuff like that, then yes, I would actually anticipate that Russia would try to escalate. I frankly expected this would happen in the Baltic Sea, but
interesting, though. I mean, then what do you make of the theory that Russia really want to push some of the limits to see exactly what NATO will do, to test the unity, to see how President Trump will respond compared to how more left-leaning European leaders would respond?
Trump is now like in balance. He has not made a decision on how to proceed, and that's why it's not simply rational for Russia kind of to push him toward a harsher position vis-a-vis Moscow, more support of Ukraine, new sanctions, and all those things.
Okay.
I just want to emphasize I'm talking about this particular moment.
Okay.
Perhaps this will continue for another kind of month or so. But in the end, the Russian kind of tactic is, and that's what I've been talking about once again for 3 years plus, is really kind of to put NATO in a position where it has to choose or to back down or to go to war. And of
Okay.
course, all Russian kind of promises about conflict do have that nuclear kind of component. So that's really the military strategy that was adopted first in 2000. It has developed since. So I would not really see anything too kind of surprising.
Okay.
It's just this particular moment. I don't think that it's really kind of credible that it was unintentional step.
Okay. So, Colonel Hamilton, well, first of all, what do you make of that analysis? And if this was a test of NATO, what do you think Moscow has learned from the reaction and response so far?
Yeah, thank you. So look, when dealing with the Kremlin and with the Russian military, there's something I think it's important to keep in mind. There's a thing called Hanlon's razor, which says never ascribe to malevolence that which can reasonably be explained by incompetence. So it's possible that this was a mistake. I tend toward Dominique's analysis, which is it was an intentional probe of both NATO's unity and NATO's defenses, right? So the idea is to do this. These were the number of drones, which the latest number I'm seeing is somewhere around 19, argues against a mistake, an accidental intrusion into Polish airspace, because this has happened many times during the war, where a singular Russian drone, either because Ukrainian electronic jamming or a malfunction on the drone itself, has wandered into Romanian, Ukrainian, or airspace in the Baltics and crashed or even landed. In Latvia, a drone landed. So that's possible, but somewhere between 10 and 20 drones, it's very unlikely that it was an accident. So I think this was an intentional probe of Polish airspace to test NATO's reaction. So the military utility for the Russians in this is to see how NATO reacts. What assets do they scramble? How effective are these assets in the air and on the ground at shooting these drones down or jamming them or disrupting them in some other way? And then the political utility is to see how NATO reacts politically and whether it fractures the alliance. In other words, does the U.S. Have the same view of this as the rest of its NATO allies?
Right. So now, I mean, we're okay. This only happened a short period of time ago, but judging so far, what you've seen, what you've heard, what lessons do you think Russia is taking from it specifically? And what should NATO be learning and doing after this incident?
So in terms of NATO's response, I think it should be more than words. I think NATO should do something that people have talked about for the duration of this war, and that is declare and establish and enforce a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine. And of course, the argument against that is that it's an escalatory step. It's an expansion of the conflict. It could cause the conflict to escalate. My counter argument to that is the conflict is going to escalate in a way that's outside of NATO's control, because Russia eventually will kill someone in a NATO country. When it continues to do this, it continues to send drones into NATO countries. It will kill someone inside a NATO country, and that will put NATO in a really serious dilemma. I think it's actually less risky to declare and enforce a no-fly zone in eastern Ukraine, deploy assets on the ground and in the air, in and over Ukraine, and shoot down Russian missiles and drones in Ukraine, because that way we're not having to shoot them down over NATO territory. That would help the Ukrainians. It would also help NATO countries prevent the type of thing that almost happened in Poland a couple of days ago.
Okay, Nikolai, very quickly, your response, and I'll get back to Dominic. Go ahead.
Yes, I'll try to be actually very quick. In fact, on non-governmental comments in Russia is actually said about the same what we just heard, that actually NATO defenses are quite actually weak and inadequate. So there's sort of like a celebration. But once again, that's outside the government. with respect to the no-fly zone, this idea was actually discussed multiple times since February 22. Yes, I just need kind of to note here that in fact it was Moscow. It has been Moscow for all these years trying, in fact, to force NATO to directly enter conflict, because that's the only situation where, in fact, the Russians can seriously leverage the nuclear kind of
Okay, that's quite
the
an
nuclear
ominous
status
If I
and
may,
nuclear
yeah.
capability.
Understood. Yeah, Dominic, go ahead.
To understand what have happened in Poland, you have to understand and you have to remember about the history of Europe, especially Poland. If someone says that that was a mistake, if that was a mistake, over 20 drones over Poland, Chechnya wasn't a mistake, Georgia wasn't a mistake, Ossetia wasn't a mistake, Ukraine is not a mistake. We know Russia for centuries. Partitions wasn't a mistake. It's a historical fact. The Russian attack on Poland on 17th of September 1939 with Germans wasn't a mistake.
Right.
So we know Russia, we Poles. The reason I'm saying that is because we understand Russia much better. We've been under the communism for 60 years, over 60 years. We understand and we know what Russia is capable to do. So the question is not if they will attack. The question is when. Is it in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, or decades? They will, because they understanding
Dominic,
of existence.
you say that now, but if President Putin were to, for whatever reason, lose power somehow, okay? Always a possibility.
Right.
Even though people think he'll be there for even decades to come. But could this equation change entirely? Is this...
No, because Russians never changed. We do have a 17th century, 18th century, 19th and 20th century. We have 2025, and Russia is still they still think that the war is the way to do politics. Their existence on this planet is a war which is combined with their politics. So my message to the political elites in Europe would be stop wearing dresses, be a man, put an armor, spend money on your army, spend money on your industry, stop reducing your industry, be a man, be a strong man and protect your family, because it's not a matter of if, it is a question of when. So elites here in European Parliament, they have to understand that this is not a movie, this is not a joke, this is actual war. If you will not be prepared for war, if they will continue, mostly leftists, if they will continue with their green ideologies, with their rubbish, with their sick ideologies, spending money on helping migrants, others than your own people, they will be weak. They made Europe weak. That's the problem.
Let me ask Colonel Hamilton, though. I mean, whether or not you believe Russia will or will not attack Poland or any other country in NATO, are we still, looking at what's happened over the last 48 hours, one accident or one miscalculation away from a huge conflict? I mean, for example, if those, as we said at the beginning, if those drones had landed in Poland and caused death and destruction, even if by accident, is that how close we are to all-out war between NATO and Russia?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think we're looking at a direct line from, let's say, a drone crashing into an apartment building and killing civilians in a NATO country to an all-out war between NATO and Russia. But it would put NATO in a very serious dilemma. And NATO would have to decide how it would respond. And what NATO would probably need to respond in some way militarily that imposes costs on Russia. And then the problem is you get yourself into an escalatory spiral where each side needs to respond escalate a little more to show the other side that it's serious. And you can find yourself in a major war through misperception and miscalculation. Again, this is why I say...
when enough is enough? That's the question. When enough is enough? We had missiles in Poland. We had over 20 drones. When is this moment to react. I'm not the one who is advocating for a war. I'm really far away from this kind of thinking. But Putin, as an ex-KGB officer, he understands power. That's why I said we need a strong man. We need people like Trump, who is tough, who is a tough guy from the very tough business.
Okay, let me.
So
Trump is not tough on Putin. We need to get this out there. Trump is not tough on Putin. U.S. policy.
He's smart on Putin. That's for sure.
U.S. policy toward Ukraine has been farcical and disastrous. Nothing has happened since the summit in Alaska, but incessant Russian escalations, right? The largest attack of the war a few days ago, a week or so ago. Then they killed 25 people standing in line to collect pensions. Then they violate Polish airspace. So to me, this is not necessarily about left and right. We have a far right government in the U.S., and the U.S. is arguably the least reliable NATO ally right now against Russia.
Let me get back.
No, if I may.
No, let me get back to Nikolai quickly because, this is the question. I mean, from your perspective then, where does Putin actually stand now? There are many that say he feels particularly emboldened because of his treatment by President Trump in Alaska, for example, back on U.S. territory with the red carpet rolled out, and then again in China. He's got both major global powers, exactly where he wants them, many would say. So where do you think President Putin really stands in respect to all of this? How confident is he truly feeling?
Well, I think he nonetheless knows and understands his limitations. Well, I think as we talk about Western policy, the important thing to keep in mind is that this is a long game. This is not something that will be resolved in a month or a few months, or in one kind of failed stroke, or a bold kind of stroke like a no-fly zone or something like that. That's a long game. So far, for 3.5 years, we've been actually able to create a lot of challenges for Putin, a lot of problems for Putin, is at the same time avoiding an open war. Obviously, my concern is exactly the same as the concern of the colonel here. Yes, I'm just afraid about escalation, where we inadvertently slide into the dynamic that will not end well. So we need to have patience, defense, and very smart kind of tactics, because we need to understand,
if I may,
that this is for a very long haul.
Okay, Dominic.
It should plan accordingly.
I know you believe that all European countries should be stepping up, spending more on defense. Defense is the answer.
Right.
But from the U.S. perspective, if Colonel Hamilton especially is right, Trump's not going to go too hard militarily on Russia. Is sanctions perhaps an answer? Because that seems to be Trump's next move if he doesn't get what he wants.
With all due respect, I do understand that American citizens knows more than I do about American politics, probably, and Mr. Trump. But we do not know how he's going to react. My personal opinion is that he's a tough guy, very smart guy, and he knows what he's doing. So far, he's doing great with all the negotiations, and my opinion, my judgment is very positive for American people. But as a European and as a Polish, I'm very straight for years, and I would say, do not look for your private bodyguard. Take care of yourself. Be a man. Spend your money on real needs rather than Green Deal, LGBT propaganda within an army as well. Stop being a snowflake. Be a man. Stop wearing dresses. Put an armor. This is important. It's time for a tough man, for a strong man, to defend your country, your family, your continent. No one will take care of you if you're not able, if you do not choose to take care of yourself.
Okay.
The US is a very, very important partner, very important, but no one will be your private bodyguard when you do not want to spend 2% on NATO like Germany, but you are spending hundreds of millions on illegal migrants. Why American taxpayers should pay for Germans who do not want to protect themselves?
Colonel Hamilton, one final issue. Fine, tough guy or not, do you think Trump, though, is going to say, as he said before, this is Europe's problem?
I think we're going to see another effort on the part of the Trump administration to engage in diplomacy to end the conflict. I think Trump personally really likes this idea of a Nobel Peace Prize. He claims to have ended 6 or 7 wars, but none of them is as important.
Which is good for the world.
As the war in Ukraine, and that number of 6 or 7 is fairly inflated. But I do think we'll see another diplomatic engagement. What I wonder about is the follow through, the sustainment. How much patience does the Trump White House have for the hard work of both diplomacy and also military activity, military signaling, serious military deterrent actions? More weapons to Ukraine, fewer restrictions on the use of those weapons to really turn the pain level up on Russia, because that's the only way you bring Russia to the table in a meaningful way and probably get an end to this war that's just.
Okay. Colonel Hamilton, that will have to be the final word for this edition of Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all 3 of my panelists sincerely so much for being with me, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.